as the world continues to grapple with volatility.
Check. Ladies and gentlemen, all those who are entering inside the hall, I'm going to request you to please clear the aisle area. Please grab your seats. I think once you all move forward, we'll also move forward and get the program started. So in a short while, we're about to get the program started. So I'm going to request every one of you to please occupy your seats. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, firstly, a hearty welcome to all of you to the second edition of the Chanakya Defense Dialogue 2024. Once again, we request our esteemed members of the audience to please take your seats, and a humble request to please keep your mobile phones on the silent mode. We're about to give the program a power-packed start, which is why what we're about to do is play Across the Curtain Razor video on the screen. So let's have all your eyes on the screen, please. And let's have the AV, please.
As the world continues to grapple with volatility, uncertainty, instability, and ambiguity, India remains resilient and focused towards growth and stability. Our ability to weather the storm can be attributed to the rich annals of our history. There's one name whose writings remain eternally relevant even today: Chanakya. A brilliant strategist, philosopher, and military advisor, he left an indelible mark on our nation's story. Chanakya's wisdom inspired the Indian Army and claws to come together to create a multinational platform, Chanakya Defense Dialogue. A platform that highlights India's strength and readiness. Bharat is moving towards centenary milestones. Holding the mantle of global leadership, it is ready to navigate not just regional but global security challenges. With a focus on cutting-edge technological solutions, driven by the spirit of Make in India, our defense sector has taken monumental strides in Atmanirbharta and fortifying India's position as a confident, self-reliant and determined nation. Join us in the spirit of Chanakya's legacy and wisdom as we commence the Chanakya Defense Dialogue 2023 with eminent speakers and domain experts from around the globe. Together, we strive for a safer, secure, and more stable world. Chanakya Defence Dialogue 2023. Collaborating for enduring peace and security.
Well, a little glimpse from the year 2023, and here we are in the second edition. With that being said, I'd also like to inform you all that in a short while, we will be having the august presence of Chief of the Army Staff. So please do note that upon his presence, there will be a bell that will ring. And when that happens, as a mark of respect, I will be announcing all of you to please rise up. But as of now, I'm going to request you all to continue being seated. That being said, safety will always be of utmost priority for all of us, which is why, for the benefit of the members of the audience, let me inform you that we've got 4 exit doors for this hall. In fact, 2 are to my right, 1 right ahead and 1 right behind, and 2 to my left, again, 1 right ahead and 1 right behind, which is why in case of any emergency, I'm going to urge all of you to head to the nearest exit, and then you can tweet about it later or discuss about it later, but safety comes as an utmost priority for all of us. With that, in a short while, we're about to get the program started. Meanwhile, I'm going to request all of you, urge all of you to continue being seated. We will be witnessing some invigorating discussions, some riveting thoughts coming in from our speakers, and I'm sure all of us are eagerly looking forward to this day, today and tomorrow as well, for the second edition of the Chanakya Defence Dialogue 2024. And for those who are entering inside the hall, once again, I'm going to request all of you to please take your seats. We'll get the program started within the next couple of minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, may I kindly request all of you to please rise up to welcome Chief of the Army Staff, General Upendra Dwivedi, Param Vishesh Seva Medal, Ati Vishesh Seva Medal, as we welcome him to the second edition of the Chanakya Defence Dialogue 2024. I now request all of you to please take your seats. Namaskar and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Indian Army and Centre for Land Warfare Studies, I am Kavya R. Chavali, extending a warm welcome to our esteemed dignitaries, our guests from across the globe, and the audience to the second edition of the Chanakya Defence Dialogue 2024. A befitting theme awaits us on drivers in nation building, fueling growth through comprehensive security. Now, this theme will provide a platform for leaders, policy makers, and SMEs to share their expertise and also contribute to the discourse on national security through development. The international conference is a platform for global engagement on various issues that address strategic and operational level discussions while focusing on critical issues. In fact, if I have to take a leaf from the Chanakya Niti itself, it is a very interesting saying that a single wheel cannot move the chariot. And clearly, we are in an age wherein we lean into one another or learn from one another, and that is why collaboration will turn the wheel forward towards growth. And I must say I'm very thankful to see all of you join us here. So with that, on that befitting note, to give a dynamic start to the program, may I please invite on stage the Director General Clause, Lieutenant General Dushyant Singh, Param Vishisht Seva Medal, Ati Vishisht Seva Medal, to please come on stage. And can we have a huge round of applause to please help me welcome Director General Clause, Lieutenant General Dushyant Singh.
Thanks, Kavya. Chief of the Army Staff, General Upendra Dwivedi, the chair, members of, there are a lot of guests who are yet to arrive, so I'll start off straight away with the preliminaries. Distinguished civil and military officers, veterans, members of the academia, scholars, industry leaders, security experts, friends from the media. It's my proud privilege to welcome you all to the second edition of the Chanakya Defense Dialogue 2024, a platform that brings together the finest minds in the defense, security, and nation building from across the globe. Your presence today reflects our shared commitment towards making India not just stronger, but also more secure and self-reliant as we journey towards Viksit Bharat by 2047. In the words of our Prime Minister, we are moving towards a Saksham, Sudrid, and Shashakt Bharat. Honorable Raksha Mantri will be addressing us in the evening at 4 p.m. I'm sure all of you will be eager to listen to him. RM's leadership has been instrumental in guiding India's defense modernization strategic initiatives. Under his direction, India is making significant strides towards building a more self-reliant defense ecosystems, a crucial part of our nation's long-term security vision. We are indeed fortunate to have the Chief of the Army Staff with us. We extend our heartfelt gratitude to him. Your leadership, along with the dedication of the armed forces, ensures that India remains a formidable force on the global stage, ready to face any challenge to our sovereignty and security. I would also like to mention here the former chiefs of the Army, Navy, and the Air Force who have contributed in their own ways towards this journey of making India more secure and more productive, and contributing towards the journey of national development towards the aim of making India developed by 1947. A very warm welcome to all international and national speakers from across the globe. Your participation is a testament to the importance of global cooperation and dialogue in the pursuit of security and peace. To our serving fraternity, veterans, academia, scholars, and industry representatives, your insights and contributions will enrich our discussions as we examine how national security and growth are interlinked. A brief word about Chanakya Defense Dialogue. The Chanakya Defense Dialogue, launched in 2023, aims to provide an intellectual platform for in-depth discussions on how defense and security form the foundation of India's overall growth and development. The core objective of this initiative is to develop a comprehensive security strategy to address emerging threats and safeguard our national interest. This is crucial in achieving the national vision of development for all. Through this dialogue, we aim to shape a cohesive and a long-term integrated perspective plan, which includes the formulation of policies and doctrines tailored to the evolving nature of warfare in the Indian context. The first edition of this seminar, held from November 3rd to 4th, 2023, focused on the theme Collaborating for Enduring Peace and Security with an emphasis on Indo-Pacific region. This year's theme, Drivers in Nation Building, Fueling Growth Through Comprehensive Security, is not only timely, but also critical as we discuss the interconnection between economic growth, strategic security, and social development. In fact, I would say the timing couldn't have been better than this. We had just recently concluded the SCO summit, thereafter the BRICS summit. The PM had visited Ukraine, Poland. I think this is coming at just the right time for us to take a discourse to a different level and to a different direction based on the various milestones which the Prime Minister spoke during the BRICS summit. What do we have for offering you this time? The agenda is jam-packed. We have 2 days of 6 sessions. The first session is Geopolitical Dynamics, Navigating International Coliseum as Global Power Dynamics Shifts. This session will explore how India can strategically position itself on the world stage, securing our interest and shaping global policies. In this session, we will have Palki moderating it, and we have the likes of Lisa Curtis, Ambassador Kamal Sibbal, who will be forming part of this particular discourse, and Karis White from Israel. So you can see the kind of spread of speakers which we are having for this particular session. The second session will be equally interesting. We will have the discussions on economic development strategies and national security imperatives. Economic strength and security are inseparable. As all of you know, I keep saying that it's a egg and chicken story. People talk about 2%, 3% budget for the defense. I say if the economic pie increases, the budget for the defense will also increase. So we will have this session being moderated by Gauri Dwivedi. She is a well-known anchor, NDTV, and also has an expertise on economic matters. And we will have other speakers, Mr. G.S. Reddy, who is the former scientific advisor to the RM and also the chairman of DRDO. And we will have the other speakers also forming part of this particular thing. Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal, who is the PM, who is the member of the PM's Economic Advisory Group. I think I'm going to have a very, very interesting discussion even in this session. In the third session, we shall talk of environmental sustainability, balancing growth with economic concerns in today's world. Climate change poses an emerging security challenge. How do we balance rapid growth with environmental sustainability while safeguarding our resources and future security? Dr. Tara would be moderating this particular session. We have Elizabeth coming all the way from US via China to us. I think we should give her a big hand for traveling all together in a continuous duration. And then we also have speakers we'll have speaker from National Defense Management Authority, our own, General Ata Hasnan, who will be speaking about disaster, which is as a result of our ignorance of climatic, overlooking climate concerns, which are actually gradually happening, as you can see, all over the world. On day 2, we commence our discussions with 2 special sessions. First one by Chairman ISRO, Dr. Somnath, who will be speaking of the new frontier of warfare, the space. He would share his thoughts on space situational awareness, monitoring and protecting national interest, and the second address would be by former permanent representative of India to the UN, Mrs. Ruchira Kamboj. She will be talking on shaping the global agenda, India's multilateral mandate. I dare say it's going to be an interesting take on India's foreign policy, given the kind of changes which are taking place today in the global geopolitical space. As you, in fact, I am now visualizing to see the way the technology is changing. The geopolitical landscape is also changing in a similar manner. The fourth session promises to be extremely interesting and also, I would say, sensitive. It will focus on internal security and social cohesion. A strong nation must also be united from within. This is what Chanakya said about 2,300 years back. We just cannot ignore this particular aspect. Thereafter, in the fifth session, we will target, I am deliberately not revealing the names of this particular session. I'll do so tomorrow, because this is going to be a very, very power-packed session. You will have some very eminent speakers talking about it. The fifth session will target blurring frontiers, the convergence of technology and security. Technology is rapidly transforming the security landscape from cyber threats to artificial intelligence. One small data point I would like to say, it took 2,300 years for human beings to tame fire, and it took just 5 days for ChatGPT to reach 1 million, and it reached 100 million in just about 60 days. So that's the kind of speed with which technology is changing, and that is why it is affecting our warfare. We will have an interesting discussion in this as well. And finally, the curtains will be drawn on Chanakya Defense Dialogue with discussion on the core area of our interest, the Indian Army's interest, and which is shaping the land warfare reflections for the Indian Army. And why only Indian Army? We will actually open the space for all the three services, and that is why, whether you call it by providence or by chance or by deliberate effort, we have created a panel which includes moderation by a naval officer, Vice Admiral A.B. Singh, who will be moderating it. There is a US Air Force War College representative, and we have the Army, of course, and all three are foreign speakers and one is an Indian speaker. I think we expect some fresh ideas for ourselves in this particular session. So look forward to that, all of you, tomorrow. The seminar is not just a dialogue, but a roadmap. It is an opportunity to discuss, and as I just told the chief, there is something for everybody in this particular seminar. So please do not go away, remain in this particular hall. We have deliberately chosen to do the Chanakya dialogue this time in this particular hall so that we can get more number of participants. In alignment with this vision, the current government initiatives are also relevant. They have laid down strong foundation for both defense preparedness and national growth. The Make in India and Atmanirbhar Bharat programs are cornerstones of our self-reliance drive, particularly in the defense manufacturing sector. In addition to this, the government's increased focus on indigenous R&D, modernization of the armed forces, and investments in innovative technologies like AI and space and cyber security will ensure that India defense remains robust and future ready. However, it is not to say that there are no shortcomings. So therefore, we would also be analyzing, critiquing the current defense procurement policy and probably come up with some suggestions to further improve it so that we have a better transparency and better capability development for the armed forces. And as we gathered today, let us draw inspirations from Chanakya, one of the India's greatest thinkers, whose teaching continue to guide us. His vision of a strong, self-reliant nation built on wisdom and strategy is what we strive for, and that's what is there in the logo of CLAUSE as well. I would close my talk with the words of Ambassador Saran, who said, India has an area, it has a population, it has resources, and it has capability, which assure it a global profile. I think he hit the nail on the head, but he also qualified, the External Affairs Minister also qualified this particular thought by saying it is now time for India to take the Krishna's choice. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Jai Hind.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir, for truly setting the tone for what's about to come for these 2 days of the Chanakya Defense Dialogue 2024. In fact, back in the morning, I had the delight of meeting someone who's also a political science student. And she very eagerly said that she's looking forward to all the deliberations over here because it will also set an impetus to the way she thinks and will also make her understand the geopolitical dynamics. So it looks like we do have an eager audience. So with that, without any delay, let's actually deep dive into our very first session coming your way, because this session aims to dissect the intricacies of international relations in the modern world, cultivating partnerships for peace and security, balancing national interests through hard and soft power, and explore the interplay between development goals and national security objectives. Now, that being said, they often say that to get the right answers, one needs to ask the right questions, which is why it's only befitting that we are in the able hands of one of the most distinguished Indian journalists and news anchors. To spearhead the session, we have with us none other than Ms. Palki Sharma, Managing Editor, Network 18. If I could please invite you on stage, Palki. And let's also have a huge round of applause In fact, she's known for her incisive reporting on international affairs, and she comes with over 2 decades of experience having worked with Doordarshan, Hindustan Times, CNN News 18, and beyond. And she also hosts a popular show on YouTube called First Post Vantage with Palki Sharma. Palki, what a delight to have you. Thank you so much for joining us. Well, that being said, you and I will now invite and welcome your panelists on stage. Ladies and gentlemen, let me go ahead and invite our esteemed speakers. First up, we have with us Lisa A. Curtis, Senior Fellow and Director, Indo-Pacific Security Program. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, she also comes with over 20 years of experience in the U.S. government, and she's a leading expert in the U.S. policy towards Indo-Pacific and South Asia, focusing on U.S.-India strategic relations, Quad cooperation, and counterterrorism strategies. Well, that's right. Let's keep that energy and that momentum going. Let me also march ahead and invite our next speaker. We have with us Karis White, founder and executive director of Signal Group. Ladies and gentlemen, Signal Group, it's an organization specializing in China-Israel and China-Middle East affairs. And she's also fostered China-Israel relations, conducted over 1,000 briefings, and also authored numerous articles and research papers focusing on China's policies affecting Israel and Middle East. And with that, let me march ahead and also invite our final speaker for the first panel. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the august presence of Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, former Foreign Secretary, Government of India. Having served as India's Foreign Secretary from 2002 to 2003, he's been India's ambassador to Turkey, Egypt, and France, and he also holds a postgraduate qualification from St. Stephen's College, New Delhi, and also received the title of full professor from the European Academy of Informationization and the World Information Distributed University. First up, it's our very first panel, our very first session. Can we have a dynamic round of applause from our members of the audience? Let's give that energy and that momentum before we deep dive. And with that, Palki, over to you.
Thank you, Kavya, and good morning to all of you. As you know, we are here to discuss chaos, drama, lawlessness, ruthlessness, and survival, or as some of us like to call it, geopolitics. The theme of this session sums up what global politics has come to represent, an international Coliseum. You will find friends in this arena, you will find rivals, you will find actors, you will find gladiators. The fight is ugly, the fight is unfair, and the stakes are very high. Our goal today then is to explore how countries must navigate this Coliseum, this maze of opportunities and challenges. But before that, let's also understand what we are dealing with. And for that, I want you to think back to some of the key stages of your life, your school, your college, your job, your family, and what is the one common thread, what is the one similarity that you find in each stage? I hope your first response is happy memories, because if not, then this session is the least of your worries. But beyond that, I think what you'll find common is that at each stage, we more or less had a set of rules. We had individuals to enforce those rules, and we knew that there were penalties or punishments for those who would not abide by those rules. That is a large framework that we all sort of understand and follow. We know how to identify the red lines, and most of us have figured out how to stay within those red lines. And that makes it easy, or relatively easy, for us to navigate our lives. But the world of geopolitics is not like that. There are no clear rules. A lot of times people don't abide by those rules, and we would like to believe that there are enforcers like the United Nations or the International Court of Justice, but you see what's happening in Gaza with more than 40,000 deaths, or you see the arrest warrant against Vladimir Putin of Russia. And you know that our international Coliseum may have rules, but these rules have no teeth. They exist merely on paper to give us a semblance of order, an impression of stability. And you may have heard this dialogue in many movies that there is only one sheriff in this town. But in our town, our world, there are no sheriffs. And sometimes there are a lot of actors who all want to play sheriff and clash with each other. So it really is the Wild West, which often makes you wonder, how is the world functioning? And history shows that there is no set playbook, there is no set formula or template to guarantee success. You have to adapt and you have to change your policy and approach according to the times. During the Cold War, it was the alliances, they were the go-to option. There was a US-led NATO alliance, there was a Soviet Union-led Warsaw Pact alliance, and between them, they started an arms race and built enough and more weapons to blow up our planet many times over. Thankfully, it did not come to that. It did not become a shooting contest. Then there were countries like India, which refused to be part of camp politics because we decided that it was not in our interest to be boxed in any alliance. But partnerships don't always have to be in a military or an ideological context. There can be economic partnerships as well, which can be quite dynamic and effective. A good example would be the European Union or the ASEAN. They're far from perfect. They have a lot of chaos internally, but they have ensured peaceful rise of the regions that they're part of. Remember, this is still the Wild West after all of this. And you have your own national security objectives within an alliance or a grouping, and those objectives may clash. So then the question is, what do you do? How do you achieve your objectives? Do you use hard power or soft power? And I would say that the answer can be found on a cricket field. You must have seen the captain sometimes set a very aggressive field against a particular player of the opposing side, so you know that this captain is after a wicket. Then there are situations when the team is spread across the field, so you know that the objective is to limit the runs that the other team scores. And in a typical match of cricket, you would see captains use both these strategies. You can say the same for countries. You have to strike a balance between hard and soft power in different situations. If you're too soft, you're seen as weak and a pushover. If you're too hard, then you're seen as a global bully. And I would say that India has effectively been able to use both these strategies. The latest example, someone mentioned China, I think, earlier today, and we've seen a border deal with China, and I think that is the result of the use of both soft and hard power. We've been able to reach this agreement after more than 30 rounds of talks spread over 4 years. So we say that this is a win for diplomacy. But this win has come in a context. These talks happened while we had also deployed brute military strength on the border. Do you think China would have agreed to an agreement, to a deal like this, had we depended only on diplomacy? Knowing the Chinese, the answer is no. The other kind of example comes from the Maldives, where the use of military strength became the source of friction. And so India leaned on its soft power and rolled out the red carpet for President Moizu and offered financial help. And today the relationship with Mali is much better than what it was a year ago. So I guess the idea is to first figure out which battles to fight, where to invest your political capital, and then how to fight them, with hard power or soft power, and in what proportion. And this is just a snapshot of the challenges that our world faces. There are many, many complexities. For instance, what happens when your national security objectives clash with your development goals? And we saw Europe face this dilemma 2 years back. When Russia invaded Ukraine, the Europeans knew that their gas supplies were coming from the Russians, and that is what powered their homes and offices. But their national security doctrine required them to cut their dependence on the same supplies. So we know what the Europeans chose eventually and how it worked out for them. India faces a similar dilemma with China. China is hands down the biggest security challenge for India, but China is also our biggest trade partner. And in a globalized world, I think these contradictions are only to be expected. What further complicates this arena is the use of new technologies and media. Because technology and media can be used to shape narratives and portray countries in a particular manner. Back in the day, the media was seen as a soft power tool where you could use it to co-opt individuals or groups or countries. But today, media can be used to demolish the credibility of a country. Today, media and technology can be used to influence political outcomes and meddle in elections. So we have to ask ourselves if media is still a soft power tool or if it is a hard power tool that is pretending to be soft. In this day and age, I think navigating geopolitics is about multitasking. You need a strong army, you need to hone your diplomatic skills, you need to ace technology, you need to build partnerships, and you must have control on the narrative or the ability to at least tell your side of the story effectively. Let me end with a quote that probably sums up how to navigate this world. Fight every battle everywhere, always in your mind. Everyone is your enemy, everyone is your friend. Every possible series of events is happening all at once. Live that way, and nothing will surprise you. Who do you think dropped this gem of an advice? Sorry, I missed that, but this is actually from the TV series Game of Thrones. It fits perfectly, I think, and if a series about gore and mindless violence can explain and sum up what our world is like today, then it should tell you how ruthless this world really is. I think I'll end my piece with that and let the experts speak. We have an excellent panel of speakers to help us understand how to navigate this world and these geopolitical dynamics. Let me first invite Lisa Curtis from the Center of New American Studies, US, to share her thoughts on cultivating partnerships for peace and security.
Okay. Well, thank you very much to Claus for inviting me here. It's a pleasure and an honor, and I also want to acknowledge the honored Army Chief for being with us. And let me just give a few of my thoughts. I think Palki did a great job opening us up, gave us a lot of food for thought. And as she said, she's asked me to speak on cultivating partnerships for peace and security. So in the face of global instability and uncertainty, I think it's absolutely critical that like-minded nations search for new and better ways to build cooperation and prepare together for potential future crises. U.S.-China competition, whether it is in the realm of global economics, the technology race, or military competition, is and will be a reality for several years to come. This does not mean that conflict between the U.S. and China is inevitable, but it does mean that addressing this China challenge will be the #1 priority for the United States for many years to come. And another reality I would like to raise as we're thinking about these challenges is the increasing strategic and military cooperation among authoritarian regimes like China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. And this what has been phrased as the axis of upheaval or axis of authoritarianism. I think this is increasingly aimed at overturning the current global order and international norms that have, frankly, kept the peace in the Indo-Pacific for the last 50 years. Just today, we are seeing reports of thousands of North Korean soldiers going to Russia probably to fight in Ukraine. And we had General Charles Flynn, the commander of U.S. Army Pacific, at the Center for a New American Security just a week ago. And he raised this issue and his concern that North Korea would be getting real-time feedback on weapon systems, and that this was a grave concern. So these are just, some of the challenges that we are facing right now. Now, the U.S., in order to address these challenges, has been cultivating partnerships and alliances. And the Biden administration refers to this as a lattice work of relationships, of multilateral, minilateral relationships with different groups of countries. And the one that I want to say a few words about is the Quad. The Quad is of course U.S., Australia, India, Japan, and was first revived during the Trump administration back in 2017, but has certainly been elevated during the Biden administration. And it really has become the linchpin of Indo-Pacific stability and an effective multilateral mechanism to support concepts like the sovereignty and independence of each nation, free and open seaways, transparent lending and investment, broad-based economic development, and peaceful resolution of disputes. It's not a military pact. It's really about four powerful maritime democracies coming together with a shared vision of the future, pooling their capabilities and resources to realize that vision. And of course, the Quad leaders met for their fourth in-person meeting last month in the United States, and they announced a new regional maritime security training initiative. They also announced a maritime legal dialogue to uphold the rules-based maritime order and a Quad observer mission to improve interoperability and advance maritime security. And I think these initiatives are critical as we see tensions rising in the South China Sea, particularly China's aggressive behavior toward the Philippines in particular. So another example of partnership in action is the AUKUS initiative. This is the Australia, UK, United States initiative to provide Australia with nuclear-powered, conventionally armed submarines. This is about burden sharing, and it's about the U.S. ensuring its allies have access to advanced capabilities that they need to contribute to a more peaceful Indo-Pacific. So finally, let me just say a few words about the U.S.-India partnership, which is also vital for preserving peace and stability in the broader Indo-Pacific region. We have initiatives like the ISET dialogue, which has led to the milestone agreement in June 2023 for the U.S. and India to co-produce jet engine technology. Also, the recent conclusion of the $4 billion deal for India to purchase 31 MQ-9B Predator drones. I think these are both testament to the deepening defense and security partnership between the U.S. and India. We have, of course, had challenges to that relationship. I don't need to tell this audience, but I think the fact that we have weathered these challenges and the relationship has stayed on course, we've maintained momentum, says a lot about both countries' commitment to that partnership. And I understand there will be an Indian Ocean dialogue happening soon between the U.S. and India, which is another important example of our partnership. And just to mention, Palki mentioned it as well, the recent India-China border agreement for patrolling along the border, which is very good news. I think this is a testament to India's patience. It took 4.5 years to get to this point, but I think it's a good sign that we can see an improvement in India-China relations, and hopefully, we will see a new phase of greater cooperation in the region. And I think this is good news for everybody. This is good news for the globe. So let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. We will talk about Quad and AUKUS and India's strategic patience, and we hope the good news lasts until it does. May I now request Karis Witt of Signal Group, Israel, to talk about balancing national interest with hard and soft power.
Thank you so much. It's really a great honor and privilege to be here. It's not easy to leave Israel. It's almost harder to get back. We've already had our flight changed because of perhaps the bombing schedules. But I am really grateful for the opportunity to share some thoughts on hard versus soft power in general, and I will bring it to a focus on China's impact on all of us and how that brings me to India and, of course, where I come from, which is Israel. So first of all, this is an event hosted by CLAW's, a military institute, and India's military. And yet I'm going to focus on everything that is non-military because they are deeply integrated. Even if we look at Gray Zone, which is an incredibly powerful tool now being used extensively by China, the Gray Zone approach is non-military, and the way that China is using it is pushing the envelope. We have seen flights into U.S. airspace recently, into Japanese territorial waters, and, of course, water cannoning the Philippines. Now, what do? How do you address this? One of the most powerful tools that we have, those of us who share a like-minded approach to rules-based global values that we've become familiar with over the last 75 years, is collaboration. And you heard about it already, but this is, and the specifics of Quad and AUKUS, Lisa just outlined. But the big picture is that when we come together and stand shoulder to shoulder, it does cause the other side, and I would say that China defines itself as the other side intentionally, and of course it's aligned to a great extent with Russia, to some extent with Iran, and to some extent with the DPRK. It causes China to take pause. And the more powerfully we're able to stand together, the more broadly and deeply we stand together, the greater is the prevention and deterrence against the need for hard power. Hard power is the last thing you want to use. However, you do need to have a significant edge in hard power to support all of your non-hard power endeavors. So the Abraham Accords was and is a lasting and very valuable tool that projects a message both in alliance strength and how relations will behave in the context of hard power. So you all saw when Iran sent 300 rockets and missiles, et cetera, to Israel, there was support from Jordan, from Saudi Arabia, from the US, et cetera. This is a testament to standing together. And I think to a great extent, it is that kind of collaboration that has prevented what everybody is hoping will not happen, which is a major conflagration that goes beyond the suffering of the Israelis, the Lebanese, and the Gazans, and to some extent the Syrians, to the entire region, which would, of course, reverberate on energy supply. And I'm quite convinced that the Chinese have been whispering in the ear of the Iranians for quite a while that they do not want to see that happen. It's not something that they can afford. Beyond that, hard power matters. Winning matters. The fact we have seen the implications or the reverberation of success in the transformation of China's very harsh attitude towards Israel during this conflict to a moderation of tone and maybe even an adjustment in policy. After Hania was assassinated in Tehran, after the pager and walkie-talkie operation, which was the most targeted operation against terror militant organization ever, and after the bunker-busting bombing of the very, very deep bunker of Hania, Israel is now seeing a change in China's tone, where the criticism was rife after the April attack by Iran, and China told Iran that it had a right to defend itself by attacking Israel with 300 rockets and missiles. After the most recent attack of 182 precision missiles, China called for restraint, not a word against Israel. And in commentaries by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which is quite hawkish against Israel, of China, and a number of leading experts from party think tanks, we saw that China is now refraining from criticizing Israel and speaking more in third-person broad terms. So the way forward is to work towards minilateral. We see the big collaboration by the United States with these major powers, with the UK, Australia in AUKUS, with Japan, Australia, and India in the Quad. Collaboration among Indo-Pacific countries, with Israel, with other like-minded Middle East countries, and perhaps bringing in European countries, is what we consider to be the way forward in collaborations that can bring two aspects of non-hard power that are critical. One is technology, and the other is information. The information war is almost as powerful as the war itself. Israel is a tiny country, barely the size of Delhi, with only part of the population, and we are portrayed as the Goliath. We are not. We are portrayed as in a very negative light. We are merely trying to survive. And it is because we are very weak in information warfare that's one of the reasons. There are a number of reasons why we're at the wrong end of this war of words. But it is critical. And how China is able to portray itself versus how the U.S. portrays itself. The U.S. propaganda machine doesn't have one. Doesn't compare to what China can produce there. So, and the other one is technology. And this is an area where, as all of you know, Israel has a great edge and is anxious to work with all of you, with other countries in the region, with countries that are supportive of the current rules-based order, in sharing our technology. And I promise you that one of the outcomes of this very terrible series of wars that we're fighting will be massive, innovative technology that will be both valuable in hard power war and soft power war, as well as civil society. So I want to conclude by thanking you again and urging all of you to consider how we can collaborate, stand shoulder to shoulder, and keep the peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karis Reed, for so nicely summing up how you balance national interest with hard and soft power. May I request Ambassador Kanwal Sibal now, former Foreign Secretary of India, to speak on the interplay between development goals and national security objectives.
Well, first of all, I want to recognize the presence of the Chief of Army Staff. It's a big honor for all of us. And I thank the Director General of CLAWS for inviting me to participate in this session. And we have a very, very competent moderator, Balkisha. I have a little grouse, though, against the director because he's given me the most difficult subject to talk about. Interplay between development goals and national security objectives. So I had to think a lot about how I can relate the two things. Now, before we talk about the interplay between national security objectives and development goals, we must be broadly clear what the national security objectives can be. This is hardly something that I should speak about in the presence of all those people who are involved in protecting our national security, but nevertheless, the most important thing is the protection of our sovereignty and our territorial integrity, which means protecting our borders. We should have the capacity to deter or repel aggression. We should focus on building a friendly neighborhood. But beyond that, we have to promote economic growth, as it is only economic growth that will generate resources to have the means to protect our national security. For that, we need access to resources. I mean, all countries don't have all the resources they need for their economic growth. Often they're not available inside our country. And therefore, we should have a policy of making sure, like China has done, of having access to all the raw materials and resources they need for their phenomenal economic growth in the last 3 decades. Self-sufficiency in food is very important. It's not always possible. India has done a remarkable job, but many countries need food security. And if you don't have that, then you need to have the resources to import. Energy self-sufficiency is extremely important, particularly for a country like India, because 80% of our energy is imported. And then there's the issue of combating climate change. This has become really a national security issue for all countries, to some in greater measure, to others in lesser measures. But, for example, the island states, Maldives was just mentioned. If climate change goes berserk, then Maldives will cease to exist. So this affects countries, particularly near the equator, as they say, much more than it might affect the temperate zones. Now, because of climate change, there's huge pressure on energy transition. And this is not something that any country can escape from doing. Then there is what we have learned from the COVID pandemic, self-sufficiency in terms of access to vaccines. India is well placed because we produce 40% of the vaccines that are exported to the world come from India. So we have huge resources, and during pandemic, it helped us enormously. Now, in terms of national security, the buzz is that we must de-risk supply chains. We should have assured, safe, secure supply chains. So the issue of supply chains, in order to reduce overdependence on a particular source, is now become a part of national security. The issue of multilateralism. Because in a chaotic world, as we see today, increasingly so, and the collapse of multilateralism increasingly, the security of many countries is imperiled. And then how do you ensure that? And one way, of course, is to make sure that multilateralism is now once again something which governs the international system. But, and you know, last year or year before, maybe it was last year, the UN had multilateralism, restoration of multilateralism as its on the agenda. Then there is, connected to this, is the entire issue of global governance and reform of the global institutions. Because if the United Nations was set up in order to avoid war and secure peace, then the United Nations has to be strengthened. And how is it to be strengthened? It has to be reformed. And other countries, developing countries, should have a greater say in the international system. And of course, there is the question of demography. Now, when you come to, by demography, I mean that if you're a very big country with a large demography and you have a skilled population, it adds to your national security, because your value in the global chain of importance of countries goes up enormously. So it's a huge buffer in terms of national security if you have a large population. Well, I don't want to go into the historical experience of Europe. The country which has the biggest population, Germany, always tended to dominate, and even now it has greater say in the system because of the size of its population, and that gets translated into the size of its economy. Now, when you look at the development goals, the best way to look at them is to see the Sustainable Development Goals, because that is the obvious reference point. And there are 17 of them. No poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry and innovation, infrastructure, reduced inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, life on land, peace, justice, and strong institutions. The odd thing is that only the SDG 16 deals with security. It's a very narrow concept of security in the SDGs. But as I explained earlier, if you look at what the country really needs for its national security, almost everything that there is in the SDGs is necessary to protect your national security. But though, as I said, the only SDG 16, it deals with peace and security. Now, in terms of the SDGs and the goals that have been described, I think we should be clear in our mind that these are aspirational goals. They are not something that can be achieved in the foreseeable future, frankly. They all sound good, but it's not going to be translated into reality. Countries can never be equal, however much you might try and promote this concept, because there are inherent inequalities in countries. I don't have to explain, it's so obvious. They are different in forms of size, resources, demography, military strength, etc. Then if you have to achieve these development goals in the context of national security, you need financial resources, you need technology, you need innovation, there is the issue of new military technologies, and all this is still dominated by the West. So how do you then talk about equality on the global stage, etc., unless there is a flow of technologies and finances from the developed world to the developing world. You have a situation where China has emerged as a rival to the United States, and it has its own hegemonic ambitions. One of the goals is life on land, which actually is something which Prime Minister Modi, in terms of his concept of life, has been alluding to, that you have to live a life which is compatible with the world's resources going forward. But I don't think the rich countries are going to change their lifestyles because they're worried about the lifestyles in the poorer countries. And as it happens, their lifestyles have become a model for the developing countries. They all want to build American, European style of prosperity, which is highly consumptive of resources, global resources. And the global resources are relatively finite. Even if there are technological solutions here and there, that's not going to solve the broader problem of access to everyone to limited resources so that everybody achieves a degree of equality. So far as India is concerned, in terms of our development goals and national security, I think everybody agrees that we must go at about 7 to 8% for the next 2 decades to be able to achieve our goal of Viksit Bharat by 2047. We have to do this even as we have a very, very challenging neighborhood. We have the problem of China that we are grappling with. We've not been able to grapple with the problem of Pakistan despite several decades. Both countries have territorial claims on India. One country has still not given up promotion of terrorism. And we have the growth of radicalization in our region, now both in the west and east, with what we are seeing happening in Bangladesh. We have to become a stronger military power. There is absolutely no question of that. And that is needed for deterrence. But we must also keep in mind that the Ukraine conflict has shown that nuclear deterrence is not an answer. After all, Russia is, along with the United States, the most powerful nuclear country in the world. And here you have a proxy war that is directly against Russia. And the nuclear dimension has not been taken into account. And Putin, therefore, has been warning time and again that don't forget, we are a nuclear power. And if our existence is threatened, then anything can happen. But his warnings have gone unheeded, and therefore there is a revision of the Russian nuclear doctrine in order to convey the message that we are serious about it. There's a lesson in it for us that our nuclear deterrence, which we are trying to build, may not be actually the answer. Therefore, we must have very strong conventional forces. That is very, very clear, apart from, of course, investing in new technologies that we see operating in the areas of conflict that we see today. We need more budgetary support. That will come when our economic growth happens, and automatically, even if it is 2% or 1.9%, but if the kitty is very large, then the billions go up. Now, the artificial intelligence issue has become extremely, extremely relevant and serious. And therefore, we have to work very hard on leveraging artificial intelligence, because this is going to affect everything, not only civilian life, but also the military. There is this whole business of civil-military fusion. This is something that China has done successfully, and America has done this for a long time. But we have to then pay far more attention to this. And then, of course, all the domestic reforms that are needed in order to achieve the kind of growth that we have in mind. So I think this is what the broad picture is with regard to the interplay between development goals and national security. I'll end by talking a little bit about the SDG 16, which is to promote peaceful societies, promote the rule of law at the international and national levels, reduce illicit financial and arms flows, combat all forms of organized crime, broaden and strengthen the participation of developing countries in the institutions of global governance, and by 2030 provide legal identity for all. These goals were supposed to be achieved by 2030. To my mind, this is just not feasible, possible. But nevertheless, this is the direction in which we have to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Subal. You have given us a lot of points that we hope we can discuss in the conversation that follows. Let me start with Lisa. According to one report, there are some 56 conflicts in our world right now. We talk about the big two, Ukraine and Gaza, but there are many more. And interestingly, more than 90 countries are involved in conflicts beyond their borders. This is the world that we live in. How do you think we can foster partnerships that go beyond military alliances to go ahead and address the root causes of protracted conflicts like the one that we see in Gaza?
Well, I'll come back to my major theme of my opening remarks, which is, continuing partnerships that build deterrence. That is critical. And also partnerships that provide public goods for countries, right? If a lot of countries in the global south, they have development needs, they have economic needs. So focusing on meeting those needs and making that the focus, I think, is how you can, prevent conflict from breaking out. And I think, encouraging democratic trends and practices, the U.S. and India, both, great democracies. I think, we know from experience that democracies are run when they're run by leaders that have to reflect the will of the people or respond to the will of the people, are far less likely to go to war with their neighbors. So I think these are important concepts. And, I'll just say the best way to prevent conflict is to be ready for conflict. And I think it gets at your opening remarks about balancing hard and soft policies in order to, maintain peace. And, we have to be ready with capabilities. We have to have strong military postures in areas prone to conflict. And, we have to work together on economics and technology with, we haven't touched on the issue of technology, but this is really also driving the pace of events, contributing to conflicts and crises between countries. And, I think it's important to have cooperation among like-mindeds on economics and technology to reduce dependencies on any one country, because that allows that country to employ economic coercion. We've seen this. I'm not going to name any countries, but I think we can guess who we're talking about. So I think, that's why it's so important for like-minded countries to be developing resilient supply chains and to be looking for new ways to work together so that, we're not dependent on any one country for, critical minerals or critical technologies, telecommunications. I think this is some of the ways that you can prevent conflict and keep the peace.
Yes, and you mentioned democracy and building partnerships, and that's very interesting, but this is a complex world, like we've been saying. And one feature of democracy is that there are elections, and elections throw up results that may be different from the previous election and bring in leaders who may not be as committed to certain partnerships as their predecessors were. And these are long-term arrangements that we're talking about. So I guess that's another challenge that we are dealing with. I'll come to that in a bit. Let me get in Karisweet into this conversation. We are talking about Israel. Like you said, it's fighting a war in Gaza and in Lebanon and facing challenges from Iran. How do you think Israel can balance its need for, its immediate military defense, that is the hard power, with its long-term diplomatic goal to find peace with its Arab neighbors? We've seen a lot of progress in the last few years, but we don't know where things stand at the moment. So how do you balance the two?
I can say it in one sentence. First we win, then we negotiate. It's the only way. It's the only way to move forward in the Middle East, and I think in other parts of the world. And listening to Lisa, you're listening to an American who comes from a very big country that is very successful, that has a lot of resources, that has an ocean on each side, that has Canada in the north and Mexico on the south, as you all know. And having that kind of environment allows you to talk about things like cooperation when you're talking about 96 conflict, or 50, 90, whatever the number was 56. You said. I obviously come from the diametric opposite, surrounded by countries that now we do have peace. We have a cold peace with Egypt. We have a cold peace with Jordan. But we have a very good normalization with the Gulf, and or at least many of the Gulf countries and others, Sudan. And I would say that democracy is something that needs to be learned, needs to be taught. And there are a number of things. If we want to prevent conflict on a global level, not just between U.S. and China, we need a few things. We need education. There has to be some, UNESCO has an education protocol for peace and tolerance. And there's an organization in Israel that analyzes the degree to which different countries adhere to that, including Israel. And Saudi Arabia and Egypt have both improved their educational systems towards peace and tolerance hugely. Guess when? When they started to want to improve relations with Israel. Other countries, and we've seen a huge deterioration in the Palestinian Authority in this way. Nobody, or at least not enough people, in my view, pay attention to education. We are all a product of our culture and our education, which leads me to the second thing that we need to pay attention to, which is culture. Each culture is going to have a very different need and approach, and we have to respect those different cultures and then adapt basic values and principles that we consider to be core, which is another question, because, there are some groups of people who believe that sending your child to suicide bomb is a core value. Kill yourself for the sake of whatever, their beliefs may be. Be they political, be they religious, whatever. So we have to have some basic rules. People say, everybody wants a better life. The Chinese say, everybody wants a better life for their child. Well, what defines a better life? In some cases, a better life is to struggle and fight and commit terror attacks in order to regain what you consider to be your land. And you've probably heard this line, from the river to the sea, although the Americans sing it out all the time on campuses. They have no idea what river or what sea they're talking about. But it happens to be the land of Israel, and leaving no part of that blue and white, which is the colors of Israel, but all green, which is the color that the Palestinians have adopted. So I would say culture and education. Then there's a couple more things. We have to empower women. In the United States, there's been huge progress. There's still a very long way to go. In Israel, we have progress. But there are many places where women do not have, and certainly even in Israel, and I look at even myself going through my own process running this organization, which deals with security, surrounded by a bunch of generals. It can be intimidating. you guys all know yourself, but sometimes you can be intimidating in your beautiful uniforms. So we have to work extra hard to stand our ground and convey our positions. And I want to thank this panel. You know, I don't know that I've ever been on a panel with 3 women and 1 man. So the last thing I want to talk about is money. If you have no money, you cannot do anything. And when Trump enforced sanctions on Iran, and in general played hardball, the world was a little bit more peaceful, I think. And since Biden, who did an outstanding job of creating partnerships, he also didn't do a good enough job in projecting power. Pulling it, the way that he pulled out of Afghanistan definitely was an example of that. And I don't know, I've learned from my military colleague who's here with me, Brigadier General Iran Ortal, who you'll hear from tomorrow, that when you are going to leave, it's very hard to do it in a good way. But nonetheless, it was not in a good way. And it left an image of the U.S. as being weak. Weakness does not lead to peace. And leadership, strong, smart leadership, is absolutely essential, not only from the U.S., but especially from the U.S. We must have better leadership that is not afraid to deal in hard power if it has to. And if you look like you're afraid to do that, many players will push the envelope, and they'll do so freely and with and admit, very honest about why they feel comfortable doing that. And I've heard many commentaries about the fact that Iran's behavior in our region, partly because the U.S. released a huge amount of funds, partly because the U.S. did not enforce those sanctions. And where did the money go? Obviously, to missiles and rockets that come at Israel and supply to all these proxies. If Hamas did not have arms, a free flow of arms from Egypt, this, October 7 probably wouldn't have happened. And I want to say, I just want to finish my comment with one remark more. At the G20, hosted by India, you did an outstanding job, and you brought in the African Union, brilliant, and you focused on your culture and your civilization and your ancient name, Bharat. And all of this, I think, is hugely powerful. The civilizational power in the long fight, in the long competition with China, is extremely important. India is a critical counterbalance, a growing counterbalance to China, certainly in the eyes of Israel, I think in the eyes of the U.S. and in many others, because of your size, because of your endless potential. And I want to note that you belong in the Security Council with a veto. And the United Nations needs to be reformed massively, or we need to just wipe it out and start again. And the reason I say that is because with everybody having a vote, an equal vote, it's not allowing for real change. I'm not sure how it can be done, but we must reimagine the United Nations, because if we're going to have a world body, it has to be much more balanced. A country of the size of India has to have its rightful place, and a country the size of Israel should not be the focus of the extreme majority of sanctions and criticism. So this is something that we need to work on as well. So I want to say, follow the money, pay attention to culture, rethink education, bring India into its rightful place in the United Nations. Thank you.
Fantastic. As you said, that being weak will not bring peace, and that is right. I think there are some wars that must be fought. But I would say that it's equally important to know when to stop and how to define the goals and measurable goals, and deal with the situation as it evolves. Ambassador Sybil, you talked about economic growth. You said that territorial integrity is paramount, but you said economic growth is what will generate resources for national security. And that is, I think, the dilemma for a lot of countries, not just India, but a lot of other countries that are locked in a territorial battle with China in the South China Sea, that while China remains a big adversary, it is also their biggest trading partner. And for all the talk of decoupling and de-risking and all friendshoring and the terms that have been used in the past few years, the world has not found an effective way to wean its economies off China. How do you balance the two?
Well, first of all, who built up China? The United States of America and its allies. They built it into a monster, and now they can't handle it when it started breathing fire. And the odd thing is that there was an alternative, China, India, democracy, autocracy. For all this talk about democracy versus autocracy, in all these years, the autocracy was built up and the democracy was neglected. So the problem of China has been created by the West. Now that China seeks to displace the United States or rival the United States or be equal to the United States, there is evidently a clash. And in that clash, India is now seen as a valuable partner. India has its own problems with China. I don't have to spell them out. We all know. But we have a different position vis-à-vis China. China is a direct neighbor after its occupation of Tibet. Therefore, we cannot have that declared, outright treatment of China as an adversary where we will do everything possible to wring it and contain it if possible and build up alliances and this and that. This is the general thing. The second is that after having built up China, and China has been very systematic in looking at the future and how they can carve out a position for themselves in the international economy, which would be essentially unassailable. Unlike the United States or other democratic countries, they cannot fashion an industrial policy the manner in which China has done. It's entirely centralized. It's not a market economy. The private sector is not really there because the private sector is, again, an offshoot of the system. So they have very systematically gone ahead, got access to vital raw materials all over the world. And after having, through various means, absorbed technologies, it has built on those technologies, and with a systematic goal of actually then being a technology-producing country, rather than simply an exporter of textiles or the low-quality, low-technical products. And they have succeeded in that. Now, when it comes to solar panels, when it comes to electrical vehicles, all in the context of transition, energy transition and climate change, China is cannot be ignored. There is no way, because they're controlling 80%, if I mistake not, of the solar panels, the solar cells and this and that, and the raw materials that go into it, likewise lithium batteries and this and that. Europe is in a big fix what to do, whether to impose tariffs on electrical vehicles or not impose tariffs on their electrical vehicles, because they don't want the destruction of their own automobile industry. When it comes to the APIs, America was a big producer of APIs. But like in other fields, the companies wanted to have cheap production. They shifted it to China. We had API production, but then it was much cheaper to import from China. Yeah. So pharmaceuticals is a very big sector of our exports and of our entire health sector that we have. But we are dependent on APIs on China. So if we stop importing APIs or put restrictions, then what do we do about our pharmaceutical exports? Similarly, all our plans for renewable energy, in which solar power is very critical. After all, Prime Minister has talked of an international solar alliance, and we are creating, our goal of 500 mega, whatever it's called, of watts of renewable energy, in which solar power is a very big component. How will we do that unless we trade with China? Our our business people, when they look at where they can get relatively cheaper imports, but now even high quality, they can't ignore China. So what has really happened is that the US discourse has changed. Earlier it was, we are going to decouple. Now they don't talk about decouple. They talk about de-risking and secure, reliable supply chains. And the trade between China and the United States has gone up, nevertheless, despite everything else. When some offshoring on all this thing has occurred, the beneficiaries have been Vietnam or countries in the periphery of China. India has not been able to attract sufficiently supply chains to our country to be able to build up our own manufacturing sector. This is an issue. The long and short is that those countries which are now confronting China, want to retard China's power, cannot do without imports from China. So India, which is now on a path of economic growth and building a manufacturing sector, and because of all the things I said, cannot ignore China. And hence we have $110, $115 billion of trade with China with an $80 billion deficit, which is the size of our defense budget, unfortunately. So we are in a bit of a pickle, but we are going in the right direction. We have excluded China from certain sensitive areas. We have put curbs on Chinese investments. And there's no TikTok here. It is still there in the United States. So we're taking whatever needs to be done in order to manage our ties with China. And the latest agreement with China is a step in that direction, that we manage China, but in a way that we don't provoke a conflict.
Right. Before I throw it open to the audience, Lisa Curtis, I want you to respond to the point that the West may have contributed to the China problem. And we're talking about alliances and how it's important to build them. But sometimes, for instance, in the recent case with NATO, the alliance has expanded post the Ukraine war, and that has only increased the threat of conflict. Would you agree with that assessment? And then how do you then ensure that there are security partnerships that serve as peace-building tools rather than solely deterrence?
Well, no, I have to respectfully disagree on the NATO question. Let's consider why NATO was initially established in 1949. It was to help Europe stand up against the threat from the Soviet Union and the spread of communism. So NATO is about collective security and collective deterrence. Its purpose is to prevent war, to prevent countries from unjustifiably invading others, like we have seen with Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. It was Sweden and Finland's decision to join NATO. They saw Russia's invasion of Ukraine. They decided for their own safety and security that they wanted to join NATO and be part of that collective organization that would help prevent Russia from contemplating invading other nations. So it's not as if Sweden and Finland, it's not as if the U.S. was begging them to join NATO. They made their own decision based on their own calculations for their own security. So I think that, we have to consider that, the invasion of Ukraine actually provoked more nations to want to join NATO. I think that really is the point. And your first question about the West contributing to the China problem, I think what Ambassador Sybil may have been referring to is the U.S. policy, throughout the 90s to try to, operate on the theory that opening up international organizations to China, enhancing trade with China, would make it a responsible stakeholder in the international system. It wasn't a bad theory. The problem was it didn't work out that way. And I think that realization really came home, during the Trump administration. Certainly, you started to see the idea that that policy, did not really work out the way previous administrations had intended. And it was time to shift the way the U.S. Was dealing with China. The Biden administration continued much of the Trump administration's policies. You had, some of the export control restrictions on Huawei and ZTE. The Biden administration has expanded some of those restrictions, especially on advanced semiconductor technology, restricting Chinese access. So now the policy is to compete effectively with China. Again, this doesn't mean conflict is inevitable between the U.S. and China, but it does mean that the U.S. Is going to recognize the challenges, compete, continue to invest in its own technologies, invest in its military, ensure it has a strong posture throughout the world, but particularly in the Indo-Pacific. So, yes, I think it's fair to say that the U.S. has shifted its strategy and focus when it comes to China.
I need to just intervene for a moment and support Lisa in both areas. We can blame choices made by Western countries, but I really think that that Russia and China have to also be held responsible for their own choices. Russia did not have to choose to respond to whatever was happening in its neighborhood in the way that it did. And China did not have to respond to entering the WTO, et cetera, the way that it did. But I want to say that I really don't think, as someone who studies China all the time, for a very long time, and I was there, I think, in China before many of you were born in 1984. And China was following the United States and the West and admiring. China admires success. China wants to bet on the winning horse. And actually, the problem wasn't the 90s, and it wasn't, I think, the bad policy. The problem was the subprime, the 2008 subprime crash, an internal U.S. huge error that I think the financial system hasn't completely changed to prevent something similar in the future. But when China saw that the U.S. did not have the secret sauce, and I was there in Beijing when they were talking about it 2 years later, and still in 2010 had not come out of it, that's when China said, you know what, maybe they don't know what they're doing and we can do it differently. So I think, the idea of blame and, the U.S. created this monster, I really disagree. I think China developed itself in its own way, based on its own culture. And the only mistake that others make is to not understand what's really going on the inside. And I think we need to hold them responsible for their choices, as well as recognizing our own mistakes and repairing them.
May I say something on this?
We're out of time. Yes, sure.
In 1989, China extremely brutally suppressed the democracy agitation. We don't know how many were killed. And now they say, I don't know the figure, but the figure is very large, but it was never revealed. And when did the United States start building up China after this? I think this speaks for itself. I don't have to make any further commentary.
Yes, we can have a long discussion on this. Also on the NATO point, there was a 3-decade gap between the time the Soviet Union disintegrated.
China's not a democratic country. It was never democratic. It will probably never be democratic. You have to look at history. You have to look at the culture and the history. Democracy did not suit them.
May I say something on this? The CCP existed then, the CCP existed now. And my reading of the situation is that the United States has to justify, after all the decades of anti-communism, to build up such a strong relationship with a communist country. Yeah. And therefore, the convenient argument was that if we engage them more, they'll become more democratic. Now they tested that over 30 years, it didn't become. Xi Jinping became more and more autocratic, kept on centralizing power. It's only much, much later when they discovered the reality when China had built. The United States thought that there was a huge technological gap between the United States and China. Yeah. And therefore they had time. But when they discovered that China had made big breakthroughs in technology, that's when the concerns began. So whether you call them, it's not a question of blame, it is just geopolitical bad judgment, that's all.
Yeah. And the other alliance that the United States struck in this region that we haven't even mentioned is, of course, Pakistan. That was extremely bad judgment, and all the money that was pumped into Pakistan in the name of fighting terrorism. I mean, look at how that played out.
And now what is happening in Ukraine? I mean, they're bringing Russia and China together. So China is like the smiling Buddha now. They have access to Russia's huge natural resources. And Europe is depriving itself of those.
So are you saying that India will cut off its trade ties with China? Is that what you're positing? That India should cut off its trade ties with China? Is that what you're positing?
Sorry?
Are you positing that India should cut off all trade ties with China?
No. I'm saying that the United States, with this policy currently pursuing, for whatever reason, one doesn't need to go into that, is actually creating a situation when in their own lights, the two autocratic powers in the world are becoming more closely intertwined. And China, which has a bit of an issue in terms of its seaboard on the Western Pacific, which United States and its allies are very strongly placed, it has now got free access, easy access to Russian resources, oil, gas, natural gas, and what have you. And therefore, and in return, they are selling a lot of these consumer goods and everything else that Russia needs, and their trade has gone up to $200 billion. Geopolitically, from our point of view, it's a big subject. I can talk about it. It doesn't make sense for the United States to pursue this policy of throwing these two countries into each other's arms, which creates problems for us too.
Right, and that's why I don't host debates, because I don't like interjecting and I don't like wrapping up when things are really getting interesting. But I would suggest we continue this conversation over tea and wrap up this session. Thank you very much for being such a wonderful audience.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think it was interesting to see the dynamics here on stage as they got to deep dive on the geopolitical dynamics. Can we have a louder round of applause as we managed to gather some extremely interesting insights from our speakers. And on that note, if I could please request Chief of the Army Staff, General Upendra Dwivedi, to please come on stage to felicitate all our speakers. So firstly, I request you to felicitate our session chair, Palki Sharma. I now request you, sir, to please felicitate Lisa A. Curtis. Sir, I now request you to please felicitate Kara Swit. And sir, I now request you to please felicitate Ambassador Kanwal Sibal. And sir, may I please request you to join all our speakers for a group photograph. If I could request all our speakers to kindly step forward. We'll call that a Kodak moment or a Canon moment, but we'll have a group photograph. Thank you once again, sir. And thank you to all our speakers, all our panelists. Thank you, Palki, for beautifully spearheading that session for us, our very first session. Ladies and gentlemen, after we have extracted all those relevant insights, it's only befitting that we now take the conversations over tea, which is why we will now be breaking for tea, and the scheduled break is for 25 minutes. I'd like to urge all of you to please reassemble in the hall. By 11:25 a.m., we're about to gear up for our next session. So I request you all to please come back by 11:25 a.m. so that we can have our successive sessions on time. Please do take care of your belongings, of course, but please do enjoy the chai and the charcha, and we'll be back again at 11:25 a.m. Thank you.